My name is Andrea Monroe, 32 years old. The dining room looked like a ceasefire zone dressed up as celebration. Candles burning too bright, silverware aligned like little soldiers, everyone sitting straighter than usual as if posture could make two families fit. My parents, Margaret and Thomas, shared the near end of the table, quiet and traditional, the kind of couple who listened more than they spoke and believed respect was a language you learned before you learned your alphabet. Across from them sat my boyfriend Daniel's parents, Lydia and Richard, retired therapists who spoke in a soft, clinical tone that made every disagreement sound like a patient's progress report. And between those two worlds, I sat beside Daniel, trying not to read too much into the fact that there were 12 plates and 13 competing agendas. Marissa had come early, as she always did, gliding in with a gift for Lydia and a hug for Richard, dropping her purse in the entry as if she still lived there. She was Daniel's ex-girlfriend, though you wouldn't know it from how the house treated her. She had a key. She knew where the wine glasses were kept without asking. She laughed a little too loudly at Daniel's father's jokes and traded old, effortless inside humor with Daniel's mother. She wore her history with my boyfriend like a silk scarf, light, elegant, and somehow always the first thing you noticed. I had said from the beginning that I was uncomfortable with how present Marissa remained in Daniel's life. I had used soft words at first, then firmer ones, then words I'd rehearsed in the car that tasted like apology, even as I spoke them. Boundaries, respect, space. Daniel heard me. He always heard me. Then he would tell me he hoped I'd learn to feel safe enough to accept their evolved, modern connections, because love wasn't a closed system, because family could mean more than blood or vows. Lydia would nod and talk about integration of past narratives. Richard would fold his hands and add, almost kindly, that I might still be operating from legacy constructs. And I would smile and sip water and remind myself that uneasy wasn't the same as unkind. We'd gathered tonight to finalize the wedding seating chart over dessert, a benign pretext, a neat little errand that looked like progress. There were place cards spread like tarot on the table runner, the future arranged into tidy groupings. Family here, friends there, neighbors, colleagues. My mother's finger hovered delicately over one particular rectangle. "Lydia, dear," she said, voice gentle, "I see that you have Marissa seated at the main family table next to your sister. I was just wondering if that was the best place for her." She lifted her eyes to Daniel's mother with a composed smile. "Perhaps a friend's table would feel more comfortable for everyone." The air thinned. I felt it go from warm to winter in one breath. Lydia set her fork down carefully, as if the tableware itself were listening. Richard's expression tightened into something professional and disappointed. Daniel's hand went rigid in his lap, and Marissa, seated diagonally opposite me, smoothed the napkin on her knees and stared at the centerpieces. "It's a fair question," I added quietly, before tension could calcify. "The family table is symbolic. Optics matter." I looked to Daniel, searching his profile for that private tenderness he kept for me in the quiet moments. "I just don't want our guests confused by an arrangement that doesn't reflect our present." "A present that includes all of me," Lydia said, her voice soft but edged, "and all of Daniel's history. We've discussed this, Andrea." Richard found his opening. "What we hear beneath your concern is fear. Fear can masquerade as tradition. It can even masquerade as dignity." His eyes moved to my mother, with respect. My mother's chin lifted, almost imperceptibly. She did not blush. She did not look away. "With respect," she echoed, and let the words rest on the linen like polished stones. Daniel cleared his throat. "We're trying to do something inclusive here," he said, and gave my knee a brief squeeze underneath the table, a gesture that was meant to reassure but only mark distance. "Marissa is family. She's been at every Thanksgiving, every birthday." "That is precisely the issue," my father said, mild voice hiding steel. "Past is past. A new household is a new covenant." Richard's smile thinned. Rigid binaries can damage relational ecosystems. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the vocabulary felt like a foreign language at a border checkpoint. Show your papers, declare your baggage, explain your metaphors. "This isn't a binary," I said softly. "It's a boundary." Marissa finally looked up, eyes bright with a defiant gloss. "I don't want to be the problem," she said, which was a sentence people only spoke when they were sure they were not the problem. I've known Daniel since we were 19. His parents are like my second parents. She gestured, helpless and pretty. We're all family. I stared at the place card marked Marissa, then at the blank one beside it where my name would go, where our names would go eventually, when the chart was final. I imagined photographs of the head table and every future holiday where captions would need footnotes to make sense. I imagined explaining the hierarchy of affection to a child. Clarity isn't control, I said, more to myself than to anyone. It's kindness. That was when Lydia leaned back, eyes gleaming with a pity she meant as compassion. Andrea, love, she said, your discomfort is not a mandate for change. Something in me took a step backward while the rest of me stayed seated. I felt Daniel sit taller, bracing. He had always wanted to believe we could be the exception, that love was an endlessly expandable table with room for everyone at the head. He wanted my past to lay down quietly with his, to form a single, painless narrative. He turned to me then, and the moment became a camera click I would remember later in perfect detail. The candlelight, the faint citrus of his cologne, the outline of his mouth as he chose his sentence. Marissa will always be part of my life, Daniel said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. She'll be at our wedding. She'll be at our holidays. She'll be at our children's baptisms. That is not negotiable. If you don't like that, don't marry me. Silence arrived like a guest who had been waiting outside for hours and finally let himself in. The clock on the mantel thought about ticking but decided against it. I could feel my parents' eyes on me, steady and sorrowing. I could feel Lydia's expectation, Richard's certainty, Marissa's breath hitch in triumph or fear. I couldn't tell which. I could feel Daniel's hand relax on his knee, as if he had just placed the final card on a winning hand. I looked at him, at the boy who had moved my couch 3 apartments ago, at the man who had held my forehead when the flu knocked me flat, at the partner who woke at 2 a.m. to drive to my office with a charger because I'd left mine at home. He had been kind to me in 1,000 small ways. Kindness can be its own kind of blindness. I waited until my heartbeat came back from wherever it had fled. I waited until the horror cooled into information, and then I nodded. Okay, I said. There was a beat where no one understood. Then Lydia's gaze sharpened like a bird's. Marissa's lips parted. Richard leaned forward. Daniel smiled, relieved, as if I had finally learned the correct answer in therapy. Okay, he echoed. So you'll... I placed my napkin on my plate and stood. I did it slowly, not because I wanted drama, but because I wanted to feel every second of leaving. I turned to my parents. Mom, Dad, we're going. My mother rose at once, her chair whispering against the hardwood. My father followed with the small, unhurried movements of a man who knows a decision has already been made in heaven and he is simply keeping time on earth. Andrea, Richard said, alarm finally leaking into his tone. This is escalation. Let's name that. This is acceptance, I replied. I am accepting the boundary your son set. Daniel stood too, hand reaching for me like a reflex. Don't be dramatic, he said, and the softness in his voice made it worse. We can talk about this. We've been talking about it for 5 years, I said. I kept my eyes on his so he would see I meant it. You made a declaration. I heard you. I believe you. Marissa's chair scraped. Andrea, I never wanted... It's not about you wanting anything, I said. It's about me wanting a marriage with a clear center. Lydia folded her arms, an old sadness passing over her face, like a storm cloud that remembered where to rain. You're choosing rigidity over growth. I smiled, a small, tired thing that felt like laying down a weight. I'm choosing a future I can explain to my children without a whiteboard. My father touched my shoulder. The gesture was as light as breath. I turned toward the hallway, toward the door I had entered with hope and would exit with peace. Daniel's voice followed me, thinner now, the edge of panic finally cutting through the velvet. Andrea, don't do this. I paused in the doorway and looked back. Not at Marissa, not at Lydia and Richard, not at the candles burning bravely for a celebration that would not come. I looked at the man I loved and saw the architecture of us, beautiful lines, clever angles, a view that always promised more than it delivered, and a foundation I had just discovered was sand. Okay, I said again, almost kindly, I won't marry you. Then I stepped into the corridor where the air felt honest and the lights were just lights, and walked out beside my parents into the night that, for the first time in months, had stars I could actually see. The car ride home was silent at first, silence so thick I could hear the hum of the tires on asphalt, the click of my father's blinker when we turned, the faint whistle of October air against the windows. I waited for grief to wash over me, for the tears, for the ache. Instead, there was only stillness, like a storm had passed through and left behind a sky scrubbed clean. My father's hands stayed steady on the wheel, though his knuckles whitened on every curve. After 10 minutes, he finally spoke. "Are you sure about this, Andrea?" His voice was low, careful, the kind of tone you use when you hope the answer doesn't undo your daughter. I stared at the passing streetlights, their glow stretching and breaking across the glass. "I've never been more sure of anything," I said. The words surprised me with how calm they sounded, as if they had been waiting on my tongue for years. My mother turned from the passenger seat, her face caught between sorrow and pride. "Good," she said simply, "because he wasn't the man for you. We were just waiting for you to see it." That night, back in the house I had bought, the house where Daniel had lived for the past 2 years, my phone became a battlefield. Messages stacked like dominoes, one falling into the next. "Daniel, Andrea, please pick up. You can't mean this. Let's talk." "Lydia, you humiliated our family tonight. This isn't how adults resolve conflict. Call us immediately." "Richard, that was a cruel stunt. We will not tolerate this behavior." "Marissa, wow, really? You're throwing away everything because of me? Grow up." I put the phone face down and let it buzz into the dark, every vibration a reminder of how much noise I had walked away from. The next morning, I made one call, just one. Cynthia, our wedding planner, answered on the second ring, her voice bright and efficient. "Andrea, are you ready for the invitations to go out? We're printing today." "Stop them," I said. My voice didn't waver. "Cancel everything." There was a pause on the line, then a cautious inhale. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?" "The wedding is off. Permanently. Do not send invitations. Do not confirm vendors. Transfer all communication to Daniel and his parents. They were handling payments." Another silence, then, "Understood." By noon, Cynthia had already called the caterer, the florist, the band, the venue. Each call was a blade cutting clean through months of preparation, and each blade came with a price tag. Non-refundable deposits stacked into a figure that would crush even a family like the Carters. By the time Daniel's father called me that evening, I knew the damage was done. His voice came over the line, strangled with rage. "Do you know how much money you've just cost us?" "I didn't cost you anything," I said, keeping my tone even. "Your son gave me an ultimatum. I accepted it." "You'll regret this," he snarled. "You'll be paying for breach of promise." I almost laughed. "You were there, Richard. A dozen people were there. Your son told me to choose between marrying him and accepting Marissa as a permanent fixture in our lives. I chose neither. That isn't breach of promise. That's honoring his condition." He sputtered something about lawyers, about responsibility, but I hung up before his fury could become my burden. By nightfall, Daniel himself appeared at my door. He still had his key, but I had locked the chain from the inside. He knocked and knocked until my neighbor's lights flicked on. Finally, I opened the door halfway. His eyes were red, his jaw unshaven, his shirt wrinkled. He looked more boy than man, more desperate than defiant. "Andrea," he said, gripping the frame, "don't do this, please. It was a stupid thing to say. You know I love you. You know that." "You meant it," I said. He shook his head wildly. "No, I was cornered. You've been saying it for 5 years, Daniel. Every time I asked for a boundary, you gave me the same answer. She stays. Last night, you just finally said the quiet part louder." His hand reached for mine, but I pulled back. "Pack your things," I told him. "Tomorrow the locks change. This is my house, not ours. You'll need to find another place to keep your ghosts." For the first time since I had known him, Daniel had no words. He just stood there, stunned, as if I'd spoken in a language he couldn't understand. Then he walked down the hall, shoulders hunched, like a man carrying a weight he had chosen and only now realized he couldn't lift. Inside, I sat on the couch, surrounded by silence. Real silence. Not the heavy, suffocating kind of the car ride, but the kind that feels like air returning to a room that had been sealed shut too long. The texts still came. The voicemails stacked. But I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because in a single word at that dinner table, I had finally rewritten the ending. Okay. The first week after the cancellation, Daniel and his parents treated it like a tantrum. They flooded my phone with messages that swung wildly between anger and bargaining. Daniel, you're blowing this out of proportion. We can fix this. Lydia, sweetheart, you're just scared. Cold feet is normal. Let's reschedule. Richard, you owe us the courtesy of a conversation. This is childish. Marissa, congrats. You ruined a family. I didn't reply to any of them. I didn't need to. The truth was already unraveling around them faster than any reply I could send. By the second week, reality hit. Cynthia, with her ruthless efficiency, had processed every cancellation. Vendors demanded fees, deposits vanished into thin air, and the grand Carter wedding bled nearly $100,000 into nothing. Lydia's cheerful tone disappeared from her voicemails. Richard's voice, when he called again, was tight with desperation. Do you realize what you've done to us financially? I let his words hang unanswered. Because the truth was simple, I hadn't done anything. They had built their empire of arrogance on sand, and now the tide had come in. Meanwhile, whispers spread through their social circle. Stories move fast when humiliation is involved. Everyone who had been at that dinner repeated what they had heard. Daniel's ultimatum, my quiet nod, my parents rising with me while his parents sat frozen. The narrative was too sharp, too delicious, to be smoothed over with excuses. Daniel wasn't the abandoned fiancé. He was the arrogant son who had demanded the impossible and lost everything. Marissa, once so proudly present at every family event, discovered her place in the Carter household wasn't as permanent as she had believed. Without the prestige of a looming wedding to attach herself to, she became what she had always been, an outsider with a key. Lydia grew cold. Richard snapped at her during dinners, and Daniel, now stripped of the glow that came with a successful fiancé, wasn't nearly as magnetic as he had been. By the third week, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Marissa had stopped answering Daniel's calls. She says he's too much work, the acquaintance whispered, almost gleeful. She liked him better when you were carrying the weight. I should have felt vindicated. Maybe I did in some quiet place, but mostly I felt free. Instead of chasing their chaos, I started chasing my own peace. I booked a ticket to Europe, something I had always wanted but had postponed because Daniel didn't see the point in wasting money on places we'll never live. For 2 weeks, I wandered narrow cobblestone streets, ate bread still warm from the oven, and listened to languages I didn't understand but felt safe inside anyway. I remembered who I was before compromise had become a second skin. When I came back, I poured myself into my work. Projects that had once felt tedious now felt like liberation. Late nights at the office no longer carried the bitterness of avoidance. They were mine, my choice, my investment in myself. One of those projects, a restoration I had been quietly managing for months, suddenly became the biggest success of my career. For the first time in years, colleagues congratulated me without adding, "Daniel must be so proud." I also reconnected with friends I had neglected, people who admitted, half laughing, half aching, that they had pulled away because they couldn't stand to see the version of me I became with him, quiet, cautious, always shrinking a little to make space for his past. They welcomed me back with open arms, and I realized friendship, unlike some kinds of love, doesn't punish you for disappearing. It waits. And as I built, Daniel's world cracked further. His parents, facing mounting bills and a tarnished reputation, began blaming him openly. Lydia's words were no longer gentle analyses, but sharp criticisms. Richard stopped attending his usual golf club dinners, too ashamed to face the questions. Their home, once a showroom of perfect family psychology, became a war zone of blame. Daniel tried to reach me once more, an email this time, long, rambling, nostalgic. He wrote about our first trip together, about the couch we bought with money we didn't have, about how he couldn't imagine his life without me. He ended it with, "Marissa doesn't matter. She never did. Please come back." I didn't answer, because the truth was brutal but simple. If she had never mattered, he would have shown me that before everything else collapsed. By the end of that month, I heard Marissa was gone completely. No more family dinners, no more casual drop-ins with a bottle of wine. She had slipped out as easily as she had slipped in, leaving Daniel to face the ruins without her. And me? I sat one evening in my quiet apartment, candles lit, a book open in my lap, and realized something that startled me. I wasn't lonely. I was alone, yes, But loneliness was gone, replaced by a fullness I had forgotten was possible. For the first time in years, I was living a life that belonged only to me. It's strange how a year can feel like a lifetime when you've shed the weight of the wrong love. 1 year after that dinner table ultimatum, my world looked nothing like the one Daniel and his family had imagined for me. My career had blossomed. The theater restoration I'd overseen was featured in a major architectural journal. There was even a gala where I walked on stage beneath glittering chandeliers, the mayor handing me an award as cameras flashed. It should have felt surreal, but instead it felt right, like the culmination of all the years I had poured myself into work while Daniel insisted my role was only support. I sold the house Daniel had once lived in and bought a loft downtown. High ceilings, exposed brick, steel beams. A space that reflected me, my taste, my independence, my new beginning. No ghosts, no compromises hiding in the corners. And yes, I started dating again. 6 months earlier, I met someone at a conference, Michael. He was steady, kind, with a wit that never cut, but always lifted. He didn't carry his ex-girlfriends into our present, didn't test my love against impossible conditions. With him, boundaries weren't battles, they were mutual respect. He made me laugh in a way Daniel never had, the kind of laughter that comes from knowing you're safe. Meanwhile, whispers about Daniel and his family reached me through mutual friends. The financial hit from the canceled wedding, combined with Richard's risky investments, had forced them to sell their sprawling house and move into a smaller condo. Lydia no longer hosted dinner parties, her carefully curated social circle scattered after the humiliation. And Daniel? He had moved back in with them. Without me, without the image of a successful future to hide behind, he struggled to find footing. Marissa was long gone. I heard she was engaged to someone else, someone who made it clear that Daniel wasn't welcome in their new life. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman he had once elevated as non-negotiable was now negotiating him right out of her future. But the true ending came unexpectedly. Michael and I attended a charity auction one crisp autumn night, dressed in black tie, sipping champagne as we browsed art we couldn't quite afford. The room was warm with laughter, the clink of glasses, the hum of an orchestra in the corner. I felt radiant, like a woman not just surviving, but thriving. And then, across the crowd, I saw him. Daniel, not in a tuxedo, not with a glass of champagne. He wasn't a guest. He was working the event, dressed in black, carrying trays of empty glasses and weaving between tables with his eyes down. For a second, I thought I'd imagined it, but then he looked up, and our eyes locked. In that brief moment, the entire weight of our history hung in the air. His face crumpled, just for a heartbeat. Gone was the smug certainty, the quiet arrogance. What remained was raw regret, naked and unguarded. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I didn't scowl. I simply turned back to Michael, who was laughing at a joke the auctioneer had just made, his hand warm over mine. Daniel disappeared into the kitchen, swallowed by swinging doors. That was the last time I saw him. As the night wore on, I realized something powerful. I felt nothing. No lingering bitterness, no secret satisfaction, just nothing. My okay at that dinner table had been the final word, and seeing him like that only proved what I had always known deep down. When someone shows you where their loyalties truly lie, believe them. A year ago, I had walked away from an ultimatum disguised as love. Tonight, I walked away from regret disguised as memory. Because sometimes the quietest goodbye is the loudest one of all.